In this episode of What's Going On with Shipping, it's the December 27th, 2021 edition of What the Ship is Going On. Top 5 news stories in the maritime sector. I am your host, Sal Mercogliano. So this is it, the last episode for the year of What the Ship is Going On, our recap of the big news stories going on in the maritime sector. So to sit there and say that I am shocked and surprised to be where we are today would be a understatement. Started this YouTube channel years ago, just putting a few videos up here and there, maybe had a couple of hundred followers. Now, over 31,000 followers, 2.6 million views, just incredible. And again, the following I have is great. And I appreciate everybody who subscribes and shares these videos and contributes to it, either through posts, sharing, through comments, through contributions through our Patreon page. I appreciate it greatly. And as a matter of fact, one of the things I want to let you know about is this Wednesday, where we normally would post an episode, I'm going to do a live show, 9 p.m. Eastern time, 6 p.m. West Coast time. Do an hour-long live show recapping the year that has been 2021, but more importantly, answering questions that you may have had over the past year. I get a lot of comments, a lot of questions, but I really want to do an hour show where we just kind of really field questions from you. So I'll be on there for the full hour. If nobody comes on, it'll be me by myself. I'll recap some big stories that I think were significant over the past year. But if you want to come on, you're free to do so. So with that done, without any further ado, let's jump into story number one. So we're going to see a lot of end of year stories coming up here for 2021. But one of the best that I've seen so far is Greg Miller's. Greg Miller over Freight Waves did this story right here. By the numbers, shipping's unparalleled year in 10 charts. And again, it hits everything I like, an end of year synopsis and charts. And Greg does an absolutely great job with this. So one of the first things he talks about is shipping stocks. This is Greg's bread and butter right here, is talking about shipping stocks. And you'll see right here, he's talking about all the different areas where shipping starts basically began and where they ended at the end of the year. And you'll see right there, containers in blue were the ones that went up, basically setting January 1st as 0, basically, and then what percentage change has happened. Really, the only one that's been kind of marginal right here has been tankers and LPG, liquefied petroleum gas, and liquefied natural gas. Bulk is up, containers are up, and across the board, maritime is up. So just a great little piece right there. Spot freight rates, man, if you look at the world, Drewry's World Container Index from Shanghai to Los Angeles, you'll see where the rates had been bouncing between 1 and 2,000 up until about early 2020, and then absolutely through the roof. And that kind of goes into the craziness that has been 2021. Container ship charter rates, same thing. Look at the rate it costs to charter a container ship. Man, I wish I would have bought some container ships at some point. I don't have that money, but I wish I could, because freight rates went through the roof and charter rates right alongside of them. Just an insane element right there. It's going to be interesting to see how this happens over the next few years. What happens is everyone's building container ships right now. You're going to see huge scrappings coming forward, and it'll be interesting to see how the container ship operators and the non-vessel operators all deal with this going forward. Import customs filings, and again, one of the things you see right here is an interesting metric in here on customs coming in. You see that dip right here in early 2020 when COVID hit and that slowdown. Then you have that infusion of cash from stimulus checks, people sitting at home redirecting their money. And while it doesn't look like much, it is a substantial growth over this period of time that we're seeing. Inbound ocean bookings, again, same exact thing. 2020, you see that little dip right there in March, and then all of a sudden you see this peak come in. This is the peak that happened because of this dip, because of what was happening, the slowdown in China and the COVID basically locking everything down. Then everything slowed up in the United States. We basically weren't buying a lot of goods, and so goods were piling up in warehouses. So things slowed down, and then all of a sudden, it just began this fairly steady growth that we see coming in here on inbound ocean containers. Ships waiting at berth for LA and Long Beach. And again, this has been an ongoing story we've been talking about here the whole time. Come back here to early 2020. This is October of 2020 when we first start seeing ships coming into the berths. By the time you get to the Biden administration coming in January 2021, we have it already happening. Peaks up here, slows down in the summertime, and then it goes through the roof. Absolutely through the roof. And I'll talk about this with the metrics, which is what's coming out from the government right now. But definitely we're seeing this. We just had the ship sortie out of LA Long Beach recently. They just did it yesterday, as a matter of fact, because of high winds and weather there. We're going to see that happening more frequently right now with winter rolling in. Dry bulk spot rates. Another interesting thing that Greg really highlights here is the growth in the dry bulk sector. This is an area that we got to get into more in the upcoming year because I think it's going to be a major factor coming in here. But you can just see the 2021 numbers, how much higher they are than 2020 and the average. Crude tanker spot rates. This has been a dicey market, obviously, right now. The crude tanker rates are down low. They are basically depressed from where they were, and we're seeing that right now. And then ship sales, just really the growth in ship sales right here. So, and add to it, new ships on water growing. We see the number of ships in, container ships, LPG, liquefied petroleum gas carriers, and liquefied natural gas carriers, all going up. 10 charts that Greg does a great job with that really captures the entire year in a quick synopsis. Read the article, go through it in details. It's great. Greg always hits it right out of the park. That's story number one. Story number two comes our update from the U.S. government. Supply chain congestion down 50%, says Commerce Secretary. That's right. The U.S. Commerce Secretary has said, oops, sorry, get rid of that thing, has said, Gina Raimondo, said that has dropped, that supply chain congestion has dropped 50% in the past month, crediting the Biden administration's actions in clearing the bottlenecks. Quote, the gifts will be on the shelves, your package will be arriving on time in the mail, and it's really a fantastic story. So the congestion is down by 50% since you and I last spoke, so it's really smooth sailing, and Santa will arrive on time. Okay, I calling BS, massive BS on this one right now. Let's be clear about a couple of things. Number one, the reason that we're not seeing shortages, large-scale shortages on the shelves, is not due to the Secretary of Commerce. It's not due to the Biden administration. It is due to the magnificent work done by truckers, yard workers, stevedores, mariners, airline pilots, you name it. I know I'm forgetting people, and I apologize. But the entire supply chain system went into overdrive to handle this situation. But this kind of statement right here does no one any good. Can I be clear? I don't know what metric she's using to measure this because she never identifies what this metric is. But we're seeing, again, flights being delayed. We're seeing record number of ships off LA and Long Beach. We're seeing ships lining up off New York and New Jersey right now. We've seen lineups off Savannah. To sit there and say that things are good. Yeah, Walmart, IKEA, Target, the big companies have been able to mitigate this by chartering ships, chartering airliners, and get around it. But listen, I live in rural North Carolina, went shopping before Christmas, went into the malls, and the mall shelves were not stocked like they usually are. I don't care what anybody tells me. You don't have to be a PhD in supply side economics to realize that there are shortages going on. Yeah, we have other things that we can put on the shelves, but, you know, for example, I was in a Lego store, a big surprise for me. I was in the Lego store. And one of the things I noticed was the fact that they were filling the shelves with basically the same things, spreading them out, trying to show that they had it, but they were remarkably down. Now, true, Christmas, they're going to be down. A lot of things are going to be sold out at that time, but much more so this year than we've seen. And even if you go over to the supply chain task force blog right here, and we look at the numbers that are being posted, they're trying to put this good cheer on this. This is the December 17th blog. Today's dashboard shows the Port of LA and Long Beach imported over 765,000 containers in November, more than 9.3 million containers so far this year. That is 15% more than they imported over the same period in 2018. Okay, let me give you this fact, and I'm just going to break this down. I could go through this whole thing here in a second, but I'm not going to. You read that statement, okay, imported over 765,000 containers in November, more than 9.3 million containers so far. That is 15% more than they imported over the same period in 2018. Which period? Are they talking about November or the entire year? Because they're talking about the entire year. Over the entire year, imports are up. That's exactly true. Port of LA and Long Beach has done a fantastic job. Their imports are up 15% over the past year. However, when you start breaking it down, let's go to the Port of LA and Long Beach's webpage right here. It's Monday, by the way, so we're waiting for the 7th announcement from the Port of LA and Long Beach that they're going to defer dwell fees. I'm waiting for it. I use it every week to set my clock. So I'm waiting for that announcement to come out. But if you start looking at their numbers here, this is their dwell report that LA has been doing. They are down 43% in their containers that are dwelling on terminal. You'll notice the 0 to 4 days are down 55%. The 5 to 8 days are only down 1%. And the 5 greater than 9 days, 5 to 8 days are down 1%. And greater than 9 days are down 45%. That should be, I would argue, substantially higher. And the reason is this. This is their monthly tally for 2021. All that big growth that they talked about, the fact that LA is moving more containers than ever before, was in the first half of the year. Again, look at the first half of the year. Look at the big months. Look at March, where they moved over 113% over what they did the previous year. February, 46%. May, 74%. Massive growth. But if you look since June into July to November, basically they've been either flat in July to September, 4% minus 0.8%, growth of 2.3%. But then in October and November, they're down 8 and 8.8% in October and November. And what that tells me is that this growth is not as big as they think it was. They ran a sprint when they should have been running a marathon. They brought in so many containers in the early part of the year. They were doing fantastic. They had over 1 million containers brought in March. The problem is they took off on a sprint and a marathon, and now they're trying to catch up. And while the Biden administration is trying to, make this sound better than it is, it's not going as good as they want. Just for an example, this is a Bloomberg government report right here talking about the fact that the Biden transportation nominees just had that video there with Ann Phillips, the nominee to become the head of the Maritime Administration. She's going to need to be reconfirmed. Why? Because it's the new year. They didn't get him appointed in time. And so there's a whole slew, including their nominee to the Federal Maritime Commission, will have to be nominated, Max Velich, who we talked about earlier. And so Port of LA, Long Beach, they've done fantastic work. I mean, there's no denying it. Again, I accolades to everybody involved in that. However, when the Secretary of Commerce comes out and says statements like this, and you go to the blog and they say things like, well, listen, we're moving more containers than ever before. We have systematic supply chain issues that need to be addressed. And this is playing smoke and mirrors with the issue. They need to be honest and forefront as we go forward. So that is story number 2. Story number 3 comes out of the Maritime Administration and the Department of Transportation, which announced over $241 million in MARAD grants for national ports. This is part of a program that has been in existence for a long time, but this also goes to the element, if you watch the video I did on the nomination and hearings of Ann Phillips to be the next head of MARAD. We talked about this $2.25 billion out of the infrastructure bill that's being put into the port grant, the Port Infrastructure Development Program, PIDP. And the first round of those were awarded 25 projects, $241 million came out. And again, there's no maritime administrator. There's no full certified nominee confirmed. We have an acting maritime administrator who I know and I've talked to in the past, Lucinda Leslie, and again, very qualified staffer and great person. But again, she has not been confirmed to be the maritime administrator. And what we're seeing is these award and grants going out. Now, my question about the awards and grants are they being doled out purely on, send in your proposal and we're going to give you money and we're going to spread it out so it's everybody gets a little piece of the wealth? Or is there an overarching plan to develop ports in the United States? And I think it's the former, not the latter. I think we're just awarding money. So, for example, you'll see Long Beach, California was awarded $52.3 million for rail enhancements projects. Houston, the Bayport Container Terminal expansion, $18.3 million. Brunswick, Georgia, for a berth down there, $14.6 million. Bay St. Louis for a rail storage yard. Tell City, Indiana, 1.6. Del Cambre, Louisiana. Alpena, Michigan, improving vessel access for sustained visibility, 3.7. Alpena, Michigan is on Lake Huron. Been there, but they're getting this. Oakland, California, powering the future, 5.2 million for electrical substation and circuit repairs. Portsmouth, 20 million for offshore wind development. Tacoma, 15.7 million for off-dock container support facilities. All these are great. I mean, obviously they need these things or else they wouldn't be awarded to them. However, one of the things that I will talk about is where's the overarching plan? For example, the port of Singapore, the nation of Singapore, I should say, is building a massive terminal. The Tuas Maga port they're building. They have just started phase 1 of this port. It's going to be the biggest port in the world. Phase 1, $2.42 billion to get 20 million TEUs capability built at this port. And if you look at this image right here, here's an image of it right here, what they're talking about. It's a huge, massive landfill area. They're using caissons. They're building a massive terminal. And again, they're looking at a place where real estate is probably one of the most expensive in the world. I said it was the most expensive. People threw back at me that it's not, but it's up there. It's Singapore. It's densely packed. And where is our port infrastructure master plan? Throwing monies at ports, and ports need money. They need infrastructure. Got it. And ports know what they need better than anybody else. But we also need a master plan. We need to take the lessons from the supply chain crisis of 2020, 2021, 2022, and potentially 2023, and come up with an overarching plan and design. The problem is the ports are the purview of state and municipal governments, not the federal government. But the federal government is doling out this money, and therefore the federal government should have something to say about it. That is story number 3. Story number 4 takes us to Europe and the impending energy crisis that is gripping Europe right now. One of the big issues has to do with the importation of natural gas into Europe via Russia. Russia has a series of pipelines that does this, the Yamal-Europe gas pipeline, which is overland, the Nord Stream, which is under the Baltic. And right now we're seeing that gas going to Europe is at zero, basically. They're not shipping gas in there right now. And what we're seeing is stocks within Europe are being depleted. Now, there's a lot of background in why this is happening. I am not a European gas expert by any means, but what I want to talk about here is how this applies to global shipping. And this article right here from Reuters at GCaptain really goes into detail here, talks about what specifically is happening here. But this other story, which is the one I want to talk about, a Bloomberg story here, talks about the fact that U.S. LNG exports caused European prices to tumble. There is a fleet of LNG, liquefied natural gas carriers. That's what these vessels are right here, liquefied natural gas carriers that are sailing out of the United States. None of them are U.S. flagged, U.S. owned. These are foreign flags, but they're going across to Europe to deliver liquefied natural gas. And this is a huge boon for the U.S. gas. And the problem is we are dumping so much liquefied natural gas into the market that we're depressing the market a bit. There's a big competition for who's going to be the big LNG exporter in the near future. Is it going to be the U.S.? Is it going to be Australia? Is it going to be Qatar? Who's it going to be? And U.S. is poised to become number one in this. Since 2016, is fairly recently, we've started this exporting of liquefied natural gas. And unfortunately, we have failed miserably to capitalize on this to get us back into the LNG exporting business. We should have been buying LNG ships on the open market, giving incentives to U.S. companies to reflag them into the U.S. fleet to be able to carry this export overseas, to give U.S. energy companies an interest in exporting them. We should also have temporarily brought some, and I'm going to say this because I get a lot of flack about the Jones Act in the United States. I'm one of those ones who says we should have brought some in, temporarily flagged them into the U.S. fleet, given them a Jones Act waiver for a set period of time, and then put a small surcharge on the export of LNG on foreign carriers to provide the shipbuilding fund necessary to finance construction of LNG, LPG carriers in the United States. We built them in the 70s and 80s, so there's no reason we can't build them now, to replace those short-term 5-year reflags in to build up a U.S. maritime industry. This takes leadership, it takes innovation, it takes bold kind of statements. You got to shake the boat a little bit. Listen, doing what we've done consistently will not change things. And let me be clear, people will sit there and say, well, the Jones Act is the reason for the U.S. decline. No, Britain's merchant marines declined. They don't have a Jones Act. The Italian merchant marines declined. They don't have a Jones Act. The French merchant marines declined. They don't have a Jones Act. The German merchant marine, I could go through the whole list of nations that had once were the top merchant marines prior to World War II. They're now down. I did a whole tweet on this where I talked about this. It's not the Jones Act. Don't sit there and blame the Jones Act for all the world's causes. There are other issues at play here that have depressed national fleets. Whose national fleet isn't depressed? China. Why is China's fleet not naturally depressed? Massive government support. That's why. Same thing in Greece. Same thing in other countries that are not in that way. And so here's an opportunity. And we know this is happening because one of the groups that we're seeing exploiting this is Russia. This story in Maritime Executive. Russia's Northern Sea route posts record year for traffic volume. Why are more ships taking the northern route? Well, one of the reasons is Russia is bringing a lot of gas and oil out of that northern route. And Russia is aiming to do this. And Russia commercially is trying to become a viable player. They're buying a brand new merchant fleet from the Koreans. Korea is building the Russian merchant fleet. Now, that costs Russia in some ways, in that their Navy is not being built to a good level because their shipbuilding expertise is going overseas. We see that with the US, but Russians are experiencing the same thing. And Russia is by no means equal or level to what we are in terms of a Navy. They may have one good task force they could put out there. However, their commercial fleet is growing, and it's something to be aware of. And that is story number 4. Story number 5 brings us full circle in COVID. End of 2021, we saw the resumption of cruise lines heading back out. Now, remember, back in 2020, it was Diamond Princess, Ruby Princess. It was a batch of cruise liners that really brought the first indication of COVID to us. Well, they've resumed their cruising, and what we're seeing right now, especially with the Omicron virus or variant, is that even if you embark an entire group of people who are vaccinated, test negative, all you got to do is be introduced into this, and you have a enclosed environment where this disease can spread very rapidly. And we're seeing it hit the cruise industry again. If you look at the stocks for Carnival, Royal Caribbean, and Norwegian that control the bulk of the cruise fleet, just like the 9 companies that control containers, those 3 companies control nearly 75 to 80% of all the cruise industry. They've taken a hit. They're only at about half their price level they were prior to COVID. They've come up and down, kind of pendulating quite a bit. You're about to see them take another fall probably here because of this. And the reinstitution of masks on vessels. This is a tough one for the cruise ships to handle. They're having a very hard time. I think what it's going to take for them to do is reduce the number of passengers on board and get more vigorous in their testing procedures, which again is not pleasant. No one wants to go on a cruise and be masked and tested on a constant basis. And so this is creating an interesting dilemma for the cruise industries. They have mortgaged themselves. They've got a lot of assets, which they were in big profits. I mean, they were in the black for quite a while here, making tremendous amount of money. However, they have basically leveraged in their assets. They've borrowed, sold stock. It's going to be an interesting thing to see what happens. So those are the top 5 stories that I identified, at least for this final week of 2021. I hope you enjoyed this episode and you enjoy this series we do every Monday, what the ship is going on. We're hoping to make some changes maybe in the future here. I'm not sure where we're going with the series yet. We'll keep you posted. We're still going to have it every Monday. What the ship is going on is going to be posted. 5 top stories are going to be there for you. And again, since Wednesday, we're doing something a little different. We're going to do a live episode. So 9 p.m., 9 evening on the East Coast, 6 on the West Coast. You can do your time differences for the rest of everybody else around the world. But we'll go live. And again, if nobody's on there, I'll talk about what I think were the biggest stories of 2021. If not, I'll field questions and talk to everyone about it. Trying to do a couple other end of the year stories. Trying to do a couple of interviews, get a few people who've been on this on the YouTube channel before back on, maybe talk about the year in review and what to expect for 2022. So hope you enjoyed the series. If you did, please subscribe, share it across social media, give it a thumbs up, leave a comment. And if you can, contribute to the Patreon page. That gives me the added luxury of not having to do other work and focus more time on this series. The series takes quite a bit of time. It takes a lot of effort for me to put it together. I know it seems seamless, and at times it seems low budget. I realize that, but believe it or not, it takes a lot of time and effort to put this all together. So until our next episode, and hopefully you'll be there on Wednesday to see you so that I can wish you officially a happy new year for the upcoming new year. Until then, Sal, signing off.